In this episode of CARPe Diem.
Over 4% of British Columbian seniors are currently in long-term care. Where would you rather be, in a private or a publicly funded facility?
CARPe Diem, seizing the day for Canadians as we age.
Welcome. Today we're discussing long-term care, but first, let's visit with Leah Bolton in this week's Zippy Zoomer.
And starter Larry Clark sends him on the way in the first of 12 on this Friday night. From the outside, glimpse of goodness put on the early lead.
Have you ever wondered who is behind the voice at the racetrack? Welcome back to our Zippy Zoomer segment. Let me introduce Dan. He has been calling at the track for the past 40 years.
The starter is called, full of horses to line up, and the starting gate is moving. It's a lot of fun. It's everything changes every race, so every 20 minutes things change. We get new actors, or we get new horses on the track, so it's a fantastic job. It's not something that when I get up in the morning I say, hey, I gotta go to work. Gate swings for the backstretch. I split my time between here and Hastings and do the announcing for both. And off and pacing.
So he's a part of Fraser Downs.
Oh, absolutely. We couldn't live here without him.
You started in this industry when you were 25.
Well, it was interesting how it all evolved. Dad worked for the paper for the Vancouver Sun, covered the races out here at Fraser Downs, and they needed somebody just to do Saturdays originally.
As they wheel by us for the first time, glimpse of goodness, debut on the board, shows the way.
But I'll tell you what, after the first 3 races, I wanted no part of doing this anymore.
Followed by galley double.
It wasn't the public speaking, it was gaining a rhythm and how you wanted to portray the race and everything.
And glimpse of goodness is trying to go all the way.
And after that came, it became very natural and it wasn't a problem.
Glimpse of goodness, custard like Maryland is dove to the passing lane.
It was just the rhythm and where you wanted to take your breath, how you wanted to tie it together.
Custard Light, I think, does win it.
There's a few drivers out there who have red colors. Okay, so that's where you're going to bet?
That's where I'm going to bet.
What a terrible way to bet. And as they come to the wire, it is free, radical, well in the clear. Now let's head back to the studio with Carmen.
Great announcer voice. If you have a Zoomer to nominate, don't forget to nominate them at zippyzoomer@carpe.ca.
Let's start today's conversation. Wanda, long-term care is a big platform for CARPe.
There's very few of CARPe members that are in long-term care. Many of them have parents that are, or they worry that someday they will be in long-term care. So we want to make sure that long-term care is available and that it is safe.
I think that long-term care is something that that a lot of us don't really think that far ahead for, but there comes a time in life, and as we noted, about 4% of seniors are in long-term care, and there gets to be a place in your life where long-term care is sometimes in need, and we have to make sure that when it is there, that it is excellent care.
Well, I think the challenge is we need to make sure that seniors and their family members have the confidence to know that if their loved one needs to go into a care facility or if they need to go into a care home, that they're going to be able to live those years with comfort and with dignity. And I think we can do a better job than we're doing, but I think we also have to acknowledge what it is we're doing that is good as well.
We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we're diving right into the status of long-term care in BC.
Still ahead on CARPe Diem.
It was approximately 2 a.m. and another resident came in and started beating him.
CARPe Diem, seizing the day for Canadians as we age.
Welcome back. Mike, what kind of options do British Columbians have for long-term care?
Well, they have a lot of options. There is an option to have private pay, but it's very expensive. And then for the overwhelming majority of people who are in long-term care, there is a publicly funded model. And that can be delivered through an owned and operated government-run care home or site. or you could have a number of options that are delivered by private providers, which may be either for-profit or non-profit companies.
So, Mike, one of the things that I've heard is about private companies coming into the long-term care sector in British Columbia, even some foreign-owned companies that are buying care beds, and some concerns about what that means for the quality of care.
Well, first of all the operators are really required to meet the terms of a contract that have been set forth. It is probably one of the most highly regulated sectors in British Columbia, and so we've identified this as being a business that has a lot of reputational risks, but it's really important that the sector itself go out there and be clear about what the options are, and make sure that that level of anxiety doesn't exist for families and those who are going to go into care.
But I think there's a lot of challenges out there. So Mike has commented that it's one of the most heavily regulated industries. It is regulated. I think there can be discussion about whether it's the most heavily regulated. I'm not sure that's correct. But I think there's also a difference between what are the regulations and what is the enforcement of the regulations and what are the penalties for non-compliance. And I think we can do better in the sector as the public and as the people who are responsible for giving those assurances to seniors and their family members that where they're going is meeting standards and is safe and has the appropriate number of staff and training of staff. I think we can do a better job. And I don't think British Columbia is particularly any better or any worse than any other province in the country.
Well, speaking of other provinces and what could go wrong, there are occasions when things can get out of hand. Darren Maharaj reports for Zed News.
And it was approximately 2 a.m. and another resident came in and started beating him.
I didn't realize how bad it was until I actually saw my dad.
That's the family of 85-year-old James Acker, who was asleep in his bed here at the St. Joseph Villa long-term care home when another resident suffering from dementia entered his room and attacked him.
You know, basically there's no safety measures in place. This really could happen at any time, this sort of resident-on-resident violence. The police did do an investigation. The other resident does have dementia, so no fault has been found.
He was assaulted previously?
That's correct. He was assaulted in September.
So this has happened twice, and they're asking you to bring him back once again to the same place?
That's correct. There's so many things that I'd like to see done. For one thing, all of the staff should have a code white button on them. Maybe we need to bring orderlies in. Like, it's frightening that 2 PSWs watched the attack happen and they had no tools to stop the attack, and that's still the situation here. It really scares me.
When you put your parents in a nursing home, they should be safe. You shouldn't have to worry about this stuff happening.
Here in Dundas, I'm Darren Maharaj for Zoomer News.
Isabel, did your report deal with these situations, and how does the system deal with these situations?
So in terms of the order of magnitude, in any given year, there are somewhere between 400 to 500 episodes of resident-to-resident aggression in our care homes, and that's out of a population of about 28,000. So as a percentage, it's not large, but as a number, I think most people would agree 400 to 500 incidents are significant. We couldn't find any determinable pattern other than a slight prevalence of incident of time of day in and around the dinner hour. And so we have some questions about why that might be. The next question we asked was, did you think the staff handled it appropriately? And actually the majority of family members did say that what they saw the staff do was appropriate. So in that clip, we saw where the family member felt that the staff members were quite helpless. And that was an Ontario example, here in British Columbia, family members, for the most part, felt that the staff had handled it appropriately. But as with all things, we still can do better, and we still should do better.
So one of the things that the public probably needs to recognize is, and it was in the most recent report that Isabel published, is that about 4 out of 5 people in long-term care have some level of cognitive challenges. So you're dealing with really high levels of dementia, and so this really kind of turns back in how you're actually delivering that care, what kind of training you're providing. When you're dealing with people who have Alzheimer's and some level of dementia, it's almost a completely different paradigm that you're dealing with in the care setting. You really have to learn some of the cues and really learn how to deal with the residents in a much different and perhaps a different, more respectful way.
What you're mentioning about the change in the composition of residents in long-term care, that's something that we've seen evolve with more and more people over time having high levels of needs. Do you think that the staff in the care facilities have evolved to meet those needs?
I would say that there is a lot of work to be done in terms of making sure we have the kind of staffing levels that we need. In British Columbia specifically, we know that there are at least two sort of key areas, two key health authorities that are talking about high levels of worker shortages on Vancouver Island in the interior. I think the government now, in fact the Minister of Health just recently commented that we're today needing about 900 new care aides to be working in seniors care right now.
Thank you for that. We're going to take a short break, but before that we asked you, would you like to live in a long-term care facility?
I would not want to be in one. I don't think there's enough checks and balances. I think the safety of our aging population is at risk as we see more and more stories coming to light about the vulnerability of people. Do we need more regulation, and do we need more watch groups overseeing what's happening? Absolutely.
CARPE Diem. Seizing the day for Canadians as we age.
Welcome back. How do we improve long-term care in BC? Mike, why don't you start with your ideas?
I think that an emphasis on quality of life is really important. I think that whether you be in owned and operated or in privately run, we're seeing that we're not doing a great job. We need to have more recreational therapy. We need to have more music programming. We need to have more things in care homes, that the kinds of things that give you meaning in life when you're not in care, you should have those access to those things when you are in care.
And I think if we look at long-term care, and I've had lots of discussions with members about this, there's a feeling of concern about, certainly people go there because they need care, but they so worry about losing their autonomy. They don't want to be told that they can only eat at certain times. I mean, they feel like they're being put back in summer camp as kids. You know, they don't want to be told they can't have a drink or that they can't have a smoke. They want to be, you know, if we could create long-term care where people really had the freedom to do what they went and not worry so much about risk limitation.
Yeah. I was going to say, I mean, you could nail down everything and make sure that you have trying to mitigate risk so much that you really do take away that kind of spontaneity, that quality of life that exists there. One of the things that I think has been a great challenge is that we are seeing far too many of our elderly loved ones being isolated. You hear stories about people just being left in a care home, never getting a visitation at all. I have to kind of give some families the benefit of the doubt. It's hard to kind of get in the car, pack up the kids, and go over across town and spend an afternoon in a care home. But if that care home was in your neighborhood, if that long-term care was around a place where you had services and shopping and amenities, and you could actually go and spend some time with a family member, have a pint of beer on a Sunday afternoon, instead of having to try and, like I say, go to the edge of town.
We want to hear more, but first, Leah Bolton reports on a personal story of a resident in long-term care. There's bad and there's good.
I approached CARPe because I was looking for another facility for my neighbor, who I had been caregiving for 15 plus years. And Veronica really needed a lot of care, and when I placed her in one facility, I was shocked.
Why were you so shocked?
Because of the care. The last straw came when she asked to be sent to the hospital. While we were standing in the hallway, I was in the hallway with her. She was on a stretcher. She said, "Deb, take off the Band-Aid on my leg." I took it off and it was black.
Oh no.
She had gangrene growing on her leg. So Veronica really didn't want to make a big to-do about it. However, I just wasn't comfortable leaving her there with that kind of care. I have since put her in a better facility at the Madison. It's night and day. She's responded well. She's got quality of life back. She's eating.
Tell me about this place. Do you like it?
Oh yes, it's very, very nice place to be. Everybody is very kind and take good care of me. I've been in other homes that have not been as good.
I mean, the care facility that I took her out of did not have enough equipment to care for her. And the nurses told me that. We don't have this stuff in stock. And that was a big red flag.
The last time in the hospital, I had a touch and go situation, so they changed and brought me here. And I feel a lot safer. So I really appreciate being here.
About 2/3 of publicly funded beds are in private facilities. Do these people receive better care?
You know, I think what we need to look at here is not so much about the type of funding, public or private, but the model of care that we're delivering. And it is time to think really transformatively. If we were to look back into how we used to treat people that were mentally ill in the time of Bedlam and how we used to chain people to beds, we're justly horrified.
I've been to these places. They're depressing.
Well, I would say, Carmen, some are depressing and some, you know, getting back to how do we deal with the fact that when we go and ask the people who are living in the care homes, and frankly, I think that's where we should be going. I think, yes, we need to look to the future and we need to think about what are the care homes going to be like for people like you and me, Mike, but in the meantime, we've also got to look at the people who are in the care homes today and what are they saying they want and what are they saying they need. And here's the challenge. Half of them actually think it's very good, and half of them don't. And why is that? And I think one of the biggest challenges, and I think that's part of the theme, Mike, that you've spoken of, and Wanda, you've spoken of, and Carmen, you've spoken of, is this individualism. About 15 or 20 years ago, we went to a model called complex care, and we put everybody together who needed some form of nursing care, whether they had dementia or not, whether they had severe physical limitations or not, whether they had behavioral problems or not, whether their backgrounds were compatible or not. We threw everybody together and we said, well, you're all going to get along and you all must want to have the same food and watch the same shows because you're all 90 years old and you're all going to have everything in common. Well, people at 90 are as different as they are at 30, 60, 70, or 80. And we've just decided for convenience that we're going to put them all together in a place called complex care. And so I think we have to unpack that a bit, and it's never pleasant to sort of realize, okay, the grand experiment had some unintended consequences. And I was part of that grand experiment 20 years ago and supported it, but it has clearly had some unintended consequences.
If you do go into a lot of the modern care homes and in British Columbia, the level of compassion and care that exists there right now from staff and the people who operate these care homes is quite remarkable. And not only that, but as Isabel said, there was a time where it was a one-size-fits-all model. But now I think we're looking at a bigger shift and a lot more discussion around person-centered care, where you are being able to individualize some of the care that you're giving to the people who are being looked after. So I'm loath to kind of tar any one sector with a brush. I think that we have an incredible amount of very positive things happening in the care sector right now. And I think it's incumbent upon us and the care providers themselves to go out there and try and tell that story.
We'll be right back, but first, let's hear your ratings on long-term care facilities.
My mother was in a long-term facility, and fortunately she was in a private one and was treated extremely well. When I talk to people and friends and my other family members that are in long-term facilities that are government-run, the differences are amazingly blatant.
CARPE Diem. Seizing the day for Canadians as we age.
It's now time to go around the table for our panel's final thoughts on long-term care. Isabel?
Well, I think the long-term care system in British Columbia has some parts of it that is working, and I think it has parts that aren't working. And I think we all have to have the generosity of heart and humility to have the kinds of discussions that recognize what the shortcomings are and to try to address those shortcomings. And I think we also have to have the understanding that for seniors, as with anybody, what we fear the most in life is our loss of autonomy and right of self-determination. And we have to do a better job of balancing that.
We have no choice but to try and really face up to the fact that we need to make sure that long-term care is done well. We have an aging society. The number of Canadians that are going to be over the age of 65 will be approximately 25% of the population within the coming decade. So that's a very large number. So we have to make sure that we get it right. And I think that the kinds of measures that the sector are talking about today, about the emphasis on quality of life and making sure that you do have that independence, you still have the things that bring you joy in life in that time of when you're in care, are absolutely critical. And the kind of things that are the dialogue that is happening right now. I know that from the people that we're dealing with, nobody is sitting on their hands and just waiting for things to happen. They're out there proactively getting involved in the conversation about how we deliver the best care possible.
First and foremost, we have to remember that for people in long-term care, it's not a facility, it's not an institution, it's home. And how can we make that home the best place for people to live so that no matter their age, their health, or their pocketbook, they are in a place where not only they want to be, but where we would want to be if we were in their shoes. So whether we need to invest in more staff or better training or a different funding model, we need to make sure that everyone has the right to live and to age in a place where their dignity and autonomy is respected.
Thank you, Isabel, for coming. Of course, Mike and Wanda, always a pleasure to have you with us. And that's the show. Remember, as our CARPe president, Moses Neimer, always says, the best way to keep going is to keep going. So stay zippy and CARPe Diem. Seize your day.